Snodgrass. Now Diame. Oh, Diame! A diamond of a goal from Mohamed Diame. 20 minutes to play in the playoff final, and Hull City hit the front.
Well, you wondered, with Kieran Westwood in outstanding form, was it going to take something spectacular? And my word, he has just produced an absolute stunner.
Hello and welcome to another episode. Oops, hang on, I've lost Dan. Where are we? There we go. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Flashback series of podcasts. I'm your host, Alex, and with me I have Dan. How are you?
Yeah, look, I'm all right. I mean, we're going to talk about some positive moments in the club's history, so that won't be too bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, coming off a win over Leicester in the league this season as well, it's we've sort of mistimed or misaligned these flashback episodes. It would have been fun to be doing the double bicycle kick game against Leicester, but that, of course, will be still to come in our following episode. But yeah, this one we're looking back on the second half of that 2015-2016 season, which of course culminated in Diame's goal at Wembley for City. But we'll jump into it. We did a bit of discussion a couple of months ago, a month or so ago, on the first half of the season. And I guess looking at the second half of the season in particular, I guess it was sort of headlined by the fact that we got Rob Snodgrass back from injury, and it was sort of that cliched, like a new signing, as tends to happen with those players who've been out with long-term injuries. We also saw City come through a pretty lean patch in that December period that we touched on last time, and enter a real stretch of good form in the start of the second half of that season, where we only dropped the one game in February. Between the 1st of January and the 26th of Feb, we only had the one loss. So really sort of got ourselves back together and really went on a bit of a run. Almost made it to the automatic spots, but fell a bit short to land in the promotion places. But I guess looking back on that second half of the season, we only brought the one player in on loan from United in Nick Powell, who we'll talk about in a little bit, as probably the only transfer business that we did. But I guess overall thoughts on that second half of the season to kick us off, Dan?
Look, I think it was a nice ride, really. Obviously the finishing off in the playoffs, I think realistically was probably like with over the balance of the season a little bit disappointing at the time. It really felt like for long stretches that we were in that top two, that we would we'd be an automatic promotion. But so as you said, a couple of little lean periods where we just couldn't quite get it together across the course of the season. Ensured that we just missed out. But did it the hard way, but got it done. So I think it was one of those. It was just, I don't know. It's just a nice overall good feelings. That's all I've really got. I think, as you say, with Snodgrass coming back, I think there were times, I think, even though we still won plenty of games without him, I think there were times where once he was back, we recognized what a big asset he really was. His set piece delivery, his ability to whip in good balls, was probably unmatched by anyone else in that squad. So really was almost a new signing, but crucial sort of return to form really quickly as well, which is not always the case from a long on return from a long injury. So
yeah, that's it. And I think, I can't remember the exact game that he came back in, but certainly that Wolves game stands out. Towards the end of the season, we won it 2-1, where Snodgrass got the winner in the 94th minute. And as you say there, his sort of set-piece delivery was on show in that game with that winning goal. And he did strike me as the sort of player where I think if he'd been fit when we were relegated, he may well not have stuck around, but really proved to be a difference in a number of games in that second half of the season, and of course the following season back in the Premier League. But it is wild. Like, you sort of look at, I think we dropped 11 games for the season, and you think, obviously in the current season, we're sort of, harboring the same ambitions to potentially make it to the playoffs or go one better. And you think the margins are so fine, where you think 11 losses in a 46 game season isn't, it's not a huge number. It's not a disastrous season. So to think that at the time, I suppose that the mentality was probably a little bit of disappointment that we hadn't made the automatic spots. And you think the margins are so fine to whether you make those automatic spots or just miss out.
Yeah, I think, when you, as you said, like 11 in 46, it's like, it's dropping one game every 4, sort of, like, which is not like, pick 9 points out of 12 every month, you'd be pretty happy with, in general. But then when you look at across the season and how many, how it adds up, and it's a bit crazy that it can come, how close it can all sort of what it can come down to. Because I think, we've been talking about it, even the current season and the start we've had, and how, some people, there's still people who are viewing that as not, a sensational start to the season. We're picking up more points than we're dropping. We're in a good position. So I think, it's just it is. I mean, it's fine margins. I think that's why it's particularly with the Championship's always referred to. It's the hardest league to get out of, because it almost seems like you can almost pinpoint in every team that either misses out on automatics or misses out on the playoffs, that you can almost always point to that one game that got away, that that sort of scuppered their chances.
And maybe the wildest part about all this as well is just touching on the off-field context as well before we go on to the players specifically. And this is when City rolled out their membership campaign, which of course we still have to this day. And I suppose as Australians is something we're reasonably familiar with, the concept of paying a monthly fee for your membership rather than buying a season ticket at the start of the year. So I think the principle of the scheme wasn't overly controversial or overly detrimental in that sense, but I think the fact that they were saying to the supporters, you've got to earn your stripes, and they had this loyalty scheme, and they were saying to these people that have been around for years and years supporting the club, you basically have to start from scratch and prove your loyalty, really rankled people. I think the fact that they were trying to get people to move out of the seats they'd been in for years and years and uproot and find new spots in the stadium didn't go down too well either. And of course, I think there was probably issues around discounting for pensioners and kids, that they just basically charged them all a flat fee, which no doubt didn't help things either. And so we had protests. We had, red card protest. I can't recall if this was the season where we also had, was it we threw softballs onto the pitch or something as well, or if that was a different season. But there were a lot of protests. So you think sort of on a backdrop of all of that to still make it into the playoffs. And I was just looking at, sort of the progression of the table. I sort of touched on the fact that we were only dropping the one game between 1st of January, 26th of Feb. We were top of the league for 6 games in a row. And it was really just those 4 defeats from March onwards that really sort of scuppered our chances of top 2. But it's sort of remarkable the job that Bruce did in the face of so much adversity. Yeah,
and I think when you talk about the membership scheme and transition to that, it's this. I mean, I think it's a familiar story that the alums, they had some of those suggestions were, it was a bit of a mixed bag. Some things were reasonable enough. Some things were fairly unreasonable. But for the most part, what was consistent was the delivery of those messages was very, very poor, and the communication with fans was very, very poor. And I think that the earn your stripes is a bit of a slap in the face to the fans who have been supporting the club for 10, 20, 30, 50 years before the alums were even on the scene. So I can fully understand why many of the fans were put offside by this, on top of everything else that the alums either had already done or would come to do. So I think they just didn't really have a good. They needed a new PR person or something, because it just could never seem to quite get it right.
That's it. Well, I sort of touched on it at the start, but the one signing that we did make that January, so winter, was Nick Powell on loan from United. And from memory, I mean, he had an okay spell with City. A couple of hamstring injuries sort of undid him in that sense. I think he was a pretty exciting prospect at the time. I think he'd had a pretty reasonable loan spell. I think it was Crewe Alexandria where he'd scored a winner at Wembley. And of course, we also had Diamande come back from an injury late in December as well, who, whilst not a new signing, had been signed in the summer window, but only made his debut basically around this time of the year as well. So they were really the only two signings that we brought in. So I guess when you consider the way we, quote unquote, dropped off in the second half of the season with, losing a massive 5 games, or 4 games, I think. No, 5 games it was. Perhaps it was the fact that we didn't overly strengthen in January. Perhaps we, I guess it's hard when you've retained a lot of the squad from the Premier League that it's hard to find the money sometimes to finance. But maybe an extra signing or two, and we could have gone on for the automatic spots. But what did you make of, or how did you assess that January?
Yeah, look, I think it's a bit of a weird one, but I think also, like, if you're at the top, like if you're in and about and the squad you've got is doing the job, maybe you just don't really feel the need, like, to, especially if you go, oh well, I've got 1 or 2 blokes who are going to come back, from injury, or Snodgrass is coming or just come back. You've got Diamande, some guys that are coming back. Well, they're going to come in. They'll help us freshen things up. I don't necessarily think it's the worst thing that we didn't make have more activity in that window. So just think, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's sort of like, we were doing the players we had were doing the job, and I think sort of as well as you allude to, there's probably been a significant outlay to maintain the squad that we had in the championship, and so to bring anyone else, anyone significant in, really, you were going to have to probably make some sales, and I think that would have probably been more detrimental to us than the not bringing in more players into the squad. So,
and I think I probably over-egged Power's influence that he made 3 league appearances for us. So I think not the most prolific of spells for him. We also had Connor Townsend head off to Scunthorpe that window, which was a sort of a pretty low-key departure at the time. But of course, he's now back playing championship football for West Brom. Seemed one of those ones at the time where he was pretty reasonably rated, but was sort of 3rd or 4th in line as left back. So you're not really going to get a look in the side in that situation, I suppose. But then we can move on. We'll talk the football games themselves. We've already sort of been touching on the league form. We talked in the first episode about the fact we had a pretty decent run in the FA Cup. We also had a similar run, in the League Cup in the first half of the episode. And then similarly, we made it to the 5th round of the FA Cup, which was a pretty reasonable result as well, with wins over Brighton, Bury, and then drawing Arsenal, which we forced a replay of when we drew the first leg 0-0. So not a bad run in the FA Cup as well. We sort of talk each season about the benefits or the disadvantages of cup runs, but I think certainly that season, when you consider the size of the squad that we had, giving the players enough football to keep themselves sort of focused and fresh and competing for spots in the team can't have been a bad thing.
No, I think it's probably no real surprise that the years we've seemed most successful, most competitive, have for the most part sort of correlated with or like being most successful in the league or most competitive in the league, have correlated with seasons where we've actually done really well in the cups as well. So I think it's just one of those things, like success breeds success, and if you're winning games, it doesn't really matter what those games mean, whether they're league or cup or whatever. But if you're winning lots of games, then you're breeding confidence, you're doing all the right things, and I think it just helps you to go out, good frame of mind, good positive attitude, helps you to go out and just keep doing it and turning up and backing up for the boys and for the club, when times are tough, if you've been, being successful and doing well. So.
Yeah, and I guess one of the more noteworthy aspects of that FA Cup run was Chuba Akpom scoring a hat-trick against Barry. And we saw him in his prolific form for Middlesbrough last season in the Championship. And then in the league, we also had a first-half hat-trick for Hernandez in a 6-0 win against Charlton, which was probably the most noteworthy of games in the second half of the season from that perspective. That was 27 goals that season for Hernandez. I think probably the most prolific season that we've had from a player other than Jared Bowen in recent years. So a terrific season for him, and really that second half of the season we were battering a couple of sides. Like, you look at some of the results, we had the 4-0 against Bristol City and the 5-1 against Rotherham on the final day of the season as well. We were a pretty prolific side that season.
Yeah, I think that was what this was. I think what I expected or hoped from Hernandez when he first signed with us. I thought he'd been playing in Italy in a good league, doing well over there. That I thought he'd come in and just that he would be he's reasonably high profile. We outlaid a fair bit on him for the time. It seems like it's peanuts now when you compare what we paid, and we're like, this is club record fees, and it's like 7 million or something. And now even the small clubs are spending 20 million on bloody people in the Prem. So, but I think he was just a really predatory striker for us, in that season particularly. And I think it almost felt like, because I think then, like, the season after, he started off pretty well, but then I think got injured again and sort of ruined got injured, and that ruined, the chance of actually like really carrying that over into the next season. But I think, he was sensational for us that year. On any given day could have been, considered unplayable. So I wish we had someone like that now.
Yeah, absolutely.
But maybe we do. Maybe Connolly or Delap will take on the mantle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, he did continue that form on into the playoffs, which is sort of the main focus of the end of this season, where he did score the opener against Derby in that first leg of the semi-final. There was the own goal from Shackle towards the end of the first half, where I think it sort of pinballed off. Odebajo had taken the shot, and it sort of pinballed off a couple of players into the goal. And then Robertson scoring what at the time seemed just like an icing on the cake sealer in the 98th minute. And you think, oh, look, it's great to cap it off with that third goal. And then with the hindsight of that second leg where we lost it 2-0 to Derby, you think, oh, geez, that third goal was actually pretty handy in the end to have. It was a weird semi-final in that sense, because you almost think that the lead in the first leg was so great that you kind of take your foot off the gas a little bit, or you take your eye off the ball in that second leg, where you kind of don't know, do you go all out and risk injuries ahead of a final? Do you go conservative but let them potentially back in the game? And it seemed as if we went a little bit to the latter with that second leg. But it was a pretty intense semi-final.
Yeah, I think certainly taking that big lead in, into the second leg potentially. Yeah, I think that there's a part of that where they probably were just going, we've got a 3-0, got a 3-goal cushion. We just have to see the game out. We don't have to do anything special. We don't have to go and score goals. So let's just play it a bit safe and just get through the 90. Get to the playoff, and then we'll to the final and worry about that. But sort of certainly made for. I mean, I think Derby as well. The reverse, they realised that they had to come, they had to score goals, and they had to start fast, and they had to put us under pressure. So I think sort of both sides of that meant that it ended up very, very nerve wracking. towards the end of that second leg. But
And I forgot they scored so early. They scored their first goal in the 7th minute, and then it was 2-0 after 36. And you think we were basically having to hold on for about an hour.
So I think, it was pretty wild, pretty nervy, but we managed to get the job done. And that we then we went to the next game and managed to get the job done.
Yeah, that's it. And the wild thing, and the great thing about doing this flashback episode, looking back on the second half of this season, was this was actually when the podcast started. So I have reasonably clear memories of sitting around the table at home doing up the notes for that final and doing a bit of analysis on all the Chef Wednesday players. So that's probably my first clear memory of the podcast. Obviously, we'd done a few episodes prior to that where we'd sort of rounded up the month's worth of games, because that was back before iFollow, so we couldn't even watch the games. We basically just did an episode every televised game and said, let's summarize all the games in between. But I've clear memories of sitting down and doing some notes and thinking about the Chef Wednesday game. And, you know, it's a strange feeling, because obviously we had that FA Cup final loss to Arsenal where we were such clear underdogs. To go into a game like this as the favourites and with the stronger squad, and you think, we should, like, the pressure, it's a different sort of pressure when you're thinking, you know, we are the ones expected to win the game. And my memories of the game, I mean, we watched it at Cheers, Mitch, myself, and a few others, was a very nervy game, but it was one where we had the bulk of the chances, and it did always feel like we'd come out in the right sort of mentality, in the right manner of playing. It was really just a matter of time. We were grinding down Westwood in goal for Chef Wednesday. And we did in the second half. And it was, you know, as seems our way at Wembley, we get the winning goal has to be a screamer, and Mo Diame delivered.
Yeah, look, I'm fairly certain if I still had access to my old Twitter account or Facebook or something, if I scroll back enough years, I'm pretty sure there'd definitely be some comments about this game. And it's probably there'd be something about Westwood, and, like, you know, if he's available, we should sign him, because he was out, you know, credit to him, he was outstanding, and he kept them in the game for a long time with some outstanding work. But I think, you know, as you know, the quality that we had in the squad, I wouldn't say it was inevitable, but, you know, they just needed the opportunity to showcase what they had. And I think, you know, eventually Diame found himself in a little pocket of space, looked up, took a shot, and sort of the rest is history.
And I love this image, because you've got Huddleston there celebrating. I'm fairly sure he's celebrating before the ball even hits the back of the net, because as soon as Diame hits it, it's such a sweet strike that you just know it's heading into the back of the net. And yeah, look, it was pandemonium. And then, of course, you know, it's sort of lived on in infamy, the fact that, you know, the unfortunate side of it being that with the relationship with the owners, our end of the ground wasn't as full as it would have otherwise been. Chef Wednesday, therefore, getting very upset about the fact that, of course, because they have more supporters, they should, you know, have some right to win the game and go on to the Premier League. But it's not the way football works. And so we were the ones to triumph. And I guess the other element to sort of reflect on out of this game is, you know, and we won't delve into it too much because it's more for the next episode, but just the way that this was the end of Steve Bruce's relationship with City. This was the last game that he managed for us. And, you know, what a way to go out in one sense, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one on reflection. But if you do, yeah, if you do look at it as you know, this is the last, you know, competitive match that he, you know, managed for us, then you're right. What a way to go out. You know, fulfilled his brief, did the job, got us back to the Prem. And I think, you know, I mean, I've said it before. I mean, there's lots of people who seem to have issues with Bruce, with his management style, with his, you know, tactical, like his default tactics and, you know, how he likes to play the game. But I think he was a great servant for us. You know, had very successful period with us. I think with us, he was the most successful he's been with any of the clubs that he's managed with at. So, yeah, I think that's really good. But yeah, as you sort of alluded to, it's a bit disappointing how it sort of all ended, fairly acrimoniously.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Yeah, well, I mean that just about wraps it up for this season. Were there any closing thoughts or reflections you had on the season?
No, I don't know. Maybe I just miss some of the players that we had, but obviously they're all old and retired now and whatnot. But just they were just a joy to. I mean, I feel like we're getting that again this season, where like the football is getting to a point where it's just fun to watch and it's enjoyable watching City play. But I think that's probably the biggest thing I miss. It's been a while since we've had players and a team that was just fun to watch.
And I think that's actually a great point to round it off with, because that squad was arguably, or maybe not even arguably, stronger than the squad that would follow in the Premier League, because this was the season. I mean, we retained Maguire and Robertson and those guys, but you think we had obviously that photo in Austria where it was about eight senior players fit in the squad. Odebajo was basically the never the same player after this game. Unfortunately, Diame left us to go to Newcastle and joining a championship club after this season. So a lot of the squad, this was almost the peak of City, as you say, like watching this squad going around, and it'll be sad to talk over the next 2 episodes about that following season and sort of the remains of that City squad as it was, and how it sort of slowly got picked apart even further that following season. But yeah, this was just about peak City of the 2010s. Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, thank you for joining me to reflect on this one, Dan.
Oh, that's all right. It's been good.
And yeah, no problem. And look, thank you everyone for joining us for this one. It's good to fill the international break with a bit of reflection on some pretty fun times with City, and of course, making the Wednesday fans cry is always enjoyable to look back on. We will be back next week to review the Leicester victory, and we'll try and bring out one of these again in the near future as well. So until then, it's a bye for now. See you.